This week we're headed to Talladega, home of big crashes, giant infield parties, and Ricky Bobby. I'm Matt Faulkner, and this is Overtime. This week we're headed to Talladega. One unique thing about Talladega is that it hosts the biggest crashes in NASCAR. Now you may ask, why does Talladega have the biggest crashes? And we're going to explain a little bit about why Talladega does have big crashes, and also what NASCAR has done over the past 30 years to improve these crashes and make them safer for the drivers. Talladega is the fastest track on the NASCAR circuit. In 1987, Bill Elliott ran an average speed lap of 212.809 miles per hour. I know that because I was a Bill Elliott fan, so I have the lap time memorized to the thousandth of a mile an hour. He ran that time in 1987, and we haven't gone that fast since. Average speed is below 200 miles an hour now on a single car qualifying lap. Perhaps insurance rates are too high to go that fast. But another reason was the crashes were getting so intense in the late 80s that frankly, NASCAR had to do something to slow the cars down. In 1987, I believe, Bobby Allison had a giant wreck in Talladega. And considering the lack of soft walls, the seat technology, the helmet technology, and the car safety in general, it was amazing that Bobby Allison survived this crash. Richard Petty had a similar crash in 1988 at Daytona. Cole Trickle had a similar crash in 1990 in Days of Thunder, as I'm sure you all saw. And due to these crashes, something had to be done to slow the cars down. So we're going to talk about what NASCAR has done to not only slow the cars down in general, but slow the cars down as they start to spin out and get sideways and backwards to keep the violent flipping over and tumbling a little more calm. The first thing that was done in 1988 in response to some of the crashes that had happened very recently was what we referred to as the restrictor plate. The restrictor plate is a plate that goes between the carburetor and the intake manifold on old carbureted engines that reduces the size of the intake ports and slows the cars down. One thing that the restrictor plate caused other than just slowing the cars down was creating the pack style racing that we see at Daytona and Talladega now. The cars used to, like pre-1987 or 1987 and earlier, the cars would still draft, but they would not draft in a giant pack like they do now. When the restrictor plate came out, the result of this was that the cars were slow enough where going as fast as you could greatly depended on following the car in front of you. And this effect increased exponentially as you went down the pack, and it created a giant clump of cars because the cars in the front of the pack could not go as fast as the cars behind them. So the excitement that we now see at Daytona and Talladega was created by the restrictor plate, which we still use today. It's referred to as a tapered spacer. The design is different, but essentially it does the same thing. It reduces the power of the cars to make them need to follow a car in front of them to go faster. I think it's worth mentioning that many drivers, when restrictor plates came out, did not like the restrictor plate. In fact, a lot of the drivers argued that the giant pack racing at a slower speed was actually more dangerous than less of a pack at higher speeds. But nonetheless, the excitement of pack racing was created at that point, remains today. And frankly, what could be more exciting than 40 cars passing by you at 200 miles an hour in 2 seconds to make you want to hold up your drink and scream boogity, boogity, boogity. Other than restrictor plates, two things that NASCAR has implemented that slow the cars down, not in a straight line, but when they get sideways and backwards, are flaps and rails. Let's talk about flaps for a minute. Flaps, roof flaps specifically, came out in 1992. Now you still see these roof flaps on the cars today. Basically, when the car gets sideways or backwards, flaps on the roof come up and act as air brakes that slow the car down so that hopefully once the car gets backwards and wants to flip over, the car has slowed down enough either to not flip over or to flip over at a slower speed. Now with roof flaps also came cowl flaps, which were these little flaps in front of the front windshield that would also pop up, act as air brakes, reduce undercar pressure, hopefully help the car from flipping. In 2013, cowl flaps became hood flaps, which are now bigger and which you still see in the cars today. I think it's worth mentioning when you watch the race this weekend and you see one car pack up behind another, you'll see the hood flaps kind of start to flip up and down due to pressure created from the car in front of it. This is not the intended use of hood flaps, but you will notice them flipping up and down. The intended use of hood flaps is to slow the car down when it gets sideways and backwards, hopefully preventing a flipping moment, or at least slowing that flip down. One new flap for 2022 is the diffuser flap, or butt flap as we refer to it here in the shop. Now this flap is located at the center of the diffuser and is actuated by the roof flap. So in the next gen car, when it gets sideways or backwards, the roof flaps deploy. There's a cable that connects the roof flap to the diffuser flap, and it unlocks the diffuser flap and it drops, and also creates an air brake that not only slows the car down, but hopefully keeps air from getting under the car. When air gets underneath the car, that's what makes a car get airborne or flip. And so the diffuser or butt flap prevents that from happening. The next thing that NASCAR has done to slow the rate of speed of the cars when they get sideways or backwards are a series of rails. These rails include roof rails, rear window rails, deck lid rails, and rails along the bottom of the rockers that we've referred to as side skirts. Roof rails were the first rail that came out, and these came out in 1989. The idea of a roof rail is that when the car gets sideways and air starts to pass over the roof, this roof rail, which is it's kind of like this, but longer. But the idea behind a roof rail is as the air hits this face of the rail, passing over the roof or rear window or trunk or underneath the car, it slows the car down so that once it gets backwards, it doesn't flip or flips at a less rate of speed. Another rail that appeared in the early 90s was called the shark fin. This rail ran down the rear window and also along the trunk, or we called it the deck lid fin. These rails started out in the early 90s and slowly got bigger over time. NASCAR figured out that this shark fin and deck fin slowed the cars down quite a bit as they got sideways, and these went from about an inch tall to maybe like 4 inches tall as time progressed. You'll notice in the Car of Tomorrow days, like 2008, 2010, that these rails got pretty big. They were metal and they looked kind of weird. So in 2013, they switched from using metal shark fins and deck fins to plexiglass shark fins and deck fins. And you can hardly see them on the cars these days because they don't show up, they're clear, but they're still there. So it's worth taking a close look at the cars as they go around the track and looking for this clear 4-inch rail running down the rear window or trunk that you can hardly see, but it is a significant aerodynamic device for slowing the cars down when they start to spin. So between restrictor plates, rails of all types, and flaps of all types, those are a few of the things that NASCAR has done to keep the cars from flipping over when they get backwards and sideways at tracks like Talladega. And I think it's worth mentioning that even though you still see cars flip over, we saw Harrison Burton flip over at Daytona, that's not necessarily a failure of these devices. These devices still slow the car down as it gets sideways and backwards so that, for example, Harrison Burton, when he flipped at less of a rate of speed than he would have had these devices not been intact. These devices are something to watch for at Talladega this weekend. Hopefully we'll see some awesome pack racing. Hopefully we'll see excitement. I'm sure we'll see crashes, but hopefully due to the implementation of these devices over the years, everyone will stay safe.